Hi, I'm Taylor Smurl, and this is Neat. Welcome to our companion video to our podcast episode all about the Negroni Spagliato with Prosecco in it. Stunning. So the G in Spagliato, we usually kind of swallow that when we pronounce it, but then again, the actor, the one that stated the drink in that very seductive way that made it go viral, that actor is British. And, they have their own way of pronouncing things, so I'm not here to correct them. They say Herb Basil. Herb Basil sounds like somebody that would deny Oliver Twist soup. Anyway, so the Negroni Spagliato. It is the final evolution in really a series of drinks that date back all the way to the invention of one of the vital ingredients in all of these drinks, which is Campari. So Campari, just an Italian bitter, came about in 1860. It was the invention of Gaspar Campari. And along with inventing his bitter, he wanted a way to sell it. He wanted a cocktail to sell it in. So Gaspar came up with the Milano Torino, which was a mix of Campari and sweet vermouth. Now, the name sort of refers to the formula itself. The Milano part referenced the Campari, which is from Milan, and then the Torino part was meant to reference a sweet vermouth, which was from Turin. Milano, Torino, Campari, and sweet vermouth. Now, that drink became very popular, but as tastes changed over the years, people started drinking highballs, longer drinks. It became popular to add a little bit of soda water to it, and that began being known as the Americano, inspired by sort of the American way of cocktailing and bartending at the time. And then the Americano is sort of our final step of evolution before we get to the Negroni. Now, the Negroni has sort of a fun origin story. There was this very colorful character in cocktail history, Count Negroni, who was he was London-based. It was arguable whether or not he was actually a count, but anyway, he was an extensive traveler, and he was a big fan of like the American West. So like he was known to he'd be from London in Italy, dressed in like a 10-gallon hat and cowboy boots, and calling himself a count. To me, this sounds like a vampire. It's not just the count thing. Like, it is definitely partially the count thing. Maybe like 75% that, but also like the weird amalgamation of different time periods and cultural aesthetics. I feel very strong vampire vibes from Count Negroni. Anyway, Count Negroni, he walks into a bar in Florence and he says, "Hey, I want an Americano, but instead of the soda water, can you give me gin?" So the bartender makes it as he likes it, and it's a hit. It's great. Starts making it for everybody, and thus the Negroni was born, named after this possible vampire Count Negroni. No basis for that. So the Negroni, classic use of Campari for decades following that, and it's not until fairly recent times, 74 to be precise, that in Milan, the Negroni Spagliato is invented. Now, the Negroni Spagliato was a drink that was supposedly made entirely by accident. In fact, it's kind of referenced there in the name itself. Negroni Spagliato means wrong or broken Negroni. And so the story goes. This bartender was working fast. The customer ordered a Negroni. He was making it without really looking at his bottles, and what he thought was a bottle of gin was actually a bottle of Prosecco. He made it. He served it, and the customer loved it, but they also realized that he'd done something differently, and thus the Spagliato was born. So that's the history of the drink. Now, some of the discourse that I've seen around it, now that it's sort of gone viral and lots of people are trying it and making it, is that some people are disappointed in it or think it's bad. If you don't like a Negroni to begin with, swapping out an ounce of gin for an ounce of Prosecco is not going to make you like it more. A Negroni by nature is a very bitter, very strong, aggressive drink. That 1 ounce of Prosecco is not going to change that. So whether you like it or whether you don't, that's between you and your palate. But I'm going to make one the way I like to make it, and I'm going to walk you through some of the choices I make in making it. Now, of course, for starters, Campari. You have to have Campari. I've got a little left. This is a popular bottle in my household. I love my drinks bitter. I like it when a drink tastes like it hates me just a little bit. Now, the next ingredient is the sweet vermouth. Now, I think this can have a pretty big impact on your Negroni and by proxy your Negroni Spagliato, what sweet vermouth you use. There's a lot of cheap, bad sweet vermouth out there. You don't want to use old sweet vermouth. But also, I think in this specific case, you want to use one from Turin. That goes historically back to the origins of the drink that eventually became the Negroni. The one specifically that Gaspar probably used was Puntames, which I have here. Now, this is a unique sweet vermouth because it's not actually all sweet vermouth. The name, Puntames, which means like point and a half, refers to how it's actually made, which is 1 part sweet vermouth to a half part a bitter Amaro. It's a quinine-based Amaro. So it makes it a little lighter, a little less sweet than some sweet vermouths, and it has a really bright, fruity, sort of bitter finish to it that's really nice. Now you might be thinking, well, if a Negroni can have a tendency to be too bitter, wouldn't using a sweet vermouth that has a bitter component just be overwhelming? No, actually. And that's because while Campari, yes, is very bitter, it also has a lot of sweetness to it. It's a very thick, kind of syrupy, bitter. And the Puntames, because it has that like sort of brighter quinine bittering agent to it and a little bit of a lighter body, I think actually both complements and contrasts the Campari really beautifully. It makes the drink altogether sort of lighter and brighter in body. And then the final ingredient seems like a no-brainer. You should use Prosecco. This is a Prosecco drink. But I think especially if you've walked into a bar in the last 2 weeks and you've ordered a Negroni Spagliato, you know, what a house is using for a sparkling element in a cocktail, it differs. Some people are using more like sort of champagne style sparkling wines or cava, and really bubbles aren't interchangeable. You know, Prosecco is not just Italy's version of champagne. They're made completely different ways, and they have completely different flavors and textures, which actually does have a lot to do with a cocktail. You know, Prosecco is a lot more sort of a bright, fruity, acidic flavor, whereas champagnes and cheaper wines that are made in a champagne style typically have a little bit more of a funky, bready dryness to it. Prosecco has a looser, bigger bubble structure, whereas things made in the champagne style, or that more traditional French style, have a tighter bubble structure to them. And these differences will have a big impact on your drink. You know, I think the Sbagliato really needs that a little bit of like fruity, bright acidity that Prosecco has, and it also really works well with the looser bubble structure. It sort of mimics more of like a soda texture. When you only have 3 ingredients in a drink, you need to think through every one of them. I mean, I think that's true if you've got 18 ingredients in a drink. You know, you need to have a reason that everything is doing what it's doing, but especially in a tighter build drink like this, everything is going to impact your final outcome. So these are my suggestions. Let's get into building the drink. Now, according to that original story, if we're to believe it, it would have been made in a rocks glass over ice, so that's how we're going to do it. Gonna go ahead and put in my 1 ounce of Campari and my 1 ounce of sweet vermouth. Now, I am not, just enough. I am not going to add my Prosecco before I stir it, because, hey, do you want to know a great way to lose all of the effervescence of an effervescent cocktail? Stir your effervescent thing. You don't want to do that. That's just going to take all your bubbles out, and it's going to make it taste more watered down than it should. I'm actually just going to stir the sweet vermouth and the Campari together, and then I'm going to add the Prosecco. Now, the other thing that I'm going to do kind of stylistically that matters is I really just want to stir this enough to get a chill on the vermouth and the Campari. I don't want to add a ton of dilution, because unlike gin, this Prosecco is going to sort of mimic that dilution. It's going to brighten it up. It's going to open it up. I don't want to add too much extra water to this. I've seen some recipes for this that will call for basically like topping your drink with Prosecco. I think that's way too much. That's just going to make, that's a spritz at this point, and this drink is not meant to really be a spritz. It's its own thing. But I do think using a little bit more Prosecco than that 1 ounce does make it a little bit more palatable, in response to the fact that I diluted it less by stirring it less. I want to make up for some of that dilution with a little bit of extra Prosecco. And I don't mean a ton. Like, that 1 ounce is fine. I'm going to do like 1.5 ounces, 2 ounces of Prosecco. So still keeping it a pretty tight drink. Now, I'm jiggering it so I can be very accurate, but it's not, you don't, just add a splash. You don't need to jigger your bubbles. It feels kind of silly. The last ingredient, of course, just a big old thick, beautiful twist. right. Cheers. I love this drink. It's refreshing. It is bitter, but that bitter is nicely tempered by the fruity elements, by the acidic elements, by the sweetness. It's not too heavy. I'll be honest, I'm less of a fan of a classic Negroni than this. I prefer this to a classic Negroni. It is, in fact, stunning. Cheers to Emma, Darcy, House of Dragons, all of the people trying this drink for the first time. If you had it in a bar and you hated it, at least make sure it was made correctly. And then if you still hate it, well, I can't help you beyond that. Drink something else. Thanks again for joining me. I've been Taylor Smurl, and this has been Neat.